Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on social policy making and priorities in times of political transformation. This is a workshop taking place within the context of the TransEuroWorkS project. For those of you unfamiliar with it, we're bringing together several different disciplines such as economics, political science, social psychology, and sociology in order to examine the global challenges in labor transformations such as digitalization, green transition, international worker mobility, and of course their consequences for the welfare state and for the regulation of labor. This is a project that has been ongoing for several years now and has been bringing together researchers from such institutions as the University of Leiden, the TU Delft, University of Barcelona, University of Geneva, King's College London, University of Copenhagen, University College Dublin, the Centre for European Policy Studies, represented today, and the Central European Labour Studies Institute. This particular event is, of course, taking place not a few days after the International Labour Day, which in and of itself is a milestone, certainly in Europe, for the examination of workers' rights and of the requests for the further protection of workers' protections, their dignity, and their stability in times of transition. But of course, these transitions, especially now with the current economic and geopolitical context, are becoming more complex, and we are navigating many attention for the policymakers of today. A couple of months ago, during the European Social Forum of 2026, we've had several announcements, of course, from the EU as to continued commitment to the social Europe, including commitments for the quality jobs agenda and an anti-poverty strategy, reforms in migration and reforms in labor mobility, but of course contrasted with what we now know to be significant shifts into what even a few years ago could have been considered standard expectations in terms of economics and in terms of political context, with also significant technological developments such as artificial intelligence having an impact. And so today I am joined by three experts who we are very fortunate to have with us, because their work sits at the heart of these debates, of the questions on the regulation of AI and digitalization in the workplace, the resilience of welfare systems in the face of energy shocks in the context of climate transitions, and of course the question of rebuilding trust in institutions at a time where many citizens feel that trust is eroding and the conditions are changing. So the first to join us today and to present his perspectives will be a senior research manager in the social policies unit at Eurofound, whose research topics include social protection, its digitalization, housing care, surveys, mental health, and the socioeconomic impacts of the green transition. This is, of course, Hans Dubois, who will be speaking now. Thank you, Hans, for joining us.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to contribute with our research findings to this important discussion. So what I will do is present basically three ideas which highlighting some topics from the broad social policies that Eurofound investigates. So the focus is really, there's some provoking thoughts in it, so it's to stimulate the discussion. So I hope this will inspire a little bit the discussion along with the presentations of the other panelists. So I will focus on three things, or highlight three things from our research. The first one is a very important one, I think, and it's about related to energy costs and social protection. The second one is about mental health, and the third one is about the digitalization of social protection. So three very different broad areas, but in some sense related, because I will present them from the perspective into the lessons on how we can make Europe a more resilient place. Now, the first one focuses on enhancing resilience of households, but also Europe in general, by reducing energy purchase needs. I know it's a bit complicated formulation, energy purchase needs, but it's needed because it doesn't only mean using less energy, but also generating your own energy, for instance. And that can be done by stepping up home insulation, solar panel installations, but also access to low energy transport infrastructure. As most Europeans live in cities, cycling could be stepped up much more seriously, as it's a zero cost activity basically, which provides people with the backup option if other means of transport become too expensive, and has other advantages as well, but also public transport, access to public transport. I wrote a blog about this. If you, it's the QR code there, which was 4 years ago, and it argued when there was the first energy price hike, which argued for, okay, subsidies may be needed in the short term, but the real long-term answer is to make households less dependent on needing to purchase energy, because there will be other energy price shocks as we see now, and there will be in the future, but by reducing the need to purchase energy of households, you make them resilient against such price shocks. And it's not about some schemes to just insulate homes a bit better. No, it's about really massively investing in this. And why would the EU do that? Because yes, you notice that social protection remains important, but there's other concerns of the EU, and that's not least that some would argue more for defense spending and that there will be less spending for social protection, while actually reducing households' energy needs or purchase needs can be seen as a very peaceful way of defense spending, because indirectly or directly, if you purchase energy, the money will float towards non-EU countries which can purchase and do purchase arms with this energy money. So it's a very peaceful way of defense spending to step up enormously the investments into making households need to purchase less energy, and thus the EU. So it's really a very effective way to both address to both improve social protection, because people need to spend less on energy and are better resilient against price shocks, but also to avoid arms are bought by non-EU countries. So it's a very peaceful way of defense spending. You could see it. Now, such measures should be a much more integral part of social protection, as we argued in our report on Social Protection 2.0. They focus often really only on income, so providing people with a certain income, which of course is important, but the other side of the expenditure side is equally as important, as well as the access to services. Now, in this context, often the term energy poverty comes up. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that term. You could term it differently, but energy poverty, okay, you can define it in certain ways which would mitigate it, but the term energy poverty really suggests that people should get more energy or access to energy. Well, that's energy is not a goal in itself. You don't burn some gas just for the sake of burning gas. You don't use energy consuming transport because you like that as such. Maybe sometimes, but it would be really the exceptions. You do it because you need to travel to work or to school. You burn gas because you want to heat or cool your homes. So the energy, access to energy is not the purpose of itself. It may be needed to achieve this, but the term energy poverty wrongly put the emphasis on energy. The emphasis should be in making sure people can get to where they need to get and can live in homes which are adequately warm or cool. And that's an important difference. And now, a last remark on this is that policymakers should really look for more for such triple win policies, and we will do at Eurofound a project on that, looking at some examples of triple win policies, because they are, firstly, they're good for households and for the EU's resilience, because there's less expenditure on energy, which indirectly or directly will benefit non-EU countries selling the energy. It is secondly good for the natural environment, and thus for quality of life in the EU. And thirdly, and that's often overlooked, it's a separate policy area. Many of these policies are very good for population health. Now that in itself is important, but to convince policymakers, population health, now cycling is an obvious one, but also reducing energy needs can be done easily in ways that you reduce also, many countries still people burn coal to warm their homes. That's not good for the neighbor, for the quality of air in the neighborhood, and not good for health, etc. Just some examples. Also in the area of food, you could think of some. Now, if you don't care so much about population health in itself, which I think we should, but if you don't, then at least you may care about the increased productivity. If people are healthy, they enjoy working better, they contribute to society, can contribute to society in different ways, like caregiving and so on. And also, policymakers may be interested in the reduced care needs, because at this pace with aging societies, it may be good to reduce the care needs of people rather than only providing care for those with needs. So by improving population health, by addressing the increasing obesity, for instance, in the population, you achieve this. And many of these triple win policies are also benefiting health. Now, just to highlight a key problem here is that at the moment, Europe is failing to, for instance, to retrofit homes of low income groups, and in particular of tenants, and that's true actually across the board, also for high income groups. Usually the incentives are not good for lessors. We don't use the word landlords or landladies. Lessors, both for lessors and tenants, there's the incentives are not good to insulate rented accommodation, which is a problem because these houses are by far the most inefficient and house people with lower incomes more. We also see much more expenditure problems and housing insecurity as a consequence of that as well. And among homeowners, especially older people, are not really reached by these measures, even though they struggle, in particular in Southern Europe and the post-communist countries. You see that older people in particular struggle with energy bills. They may own their home without a mortgage, but they really have a hard time making ends meet, partly because of large energy bills. But they have no, they cannot even make upfront payments to insulate their homes, even if subsidized. So they need to be reached. Now, lastly, a side note, a bit more provocative, also in the report we wrote with European Environmental Agency, looking at some foresight modeling of the transition to a climate neutral economy. There may also be scope for some sufficiency, so more limited consumption, assuming as a precondition that there's a fair distribution of resources. So maybe this could feed into discussion as well as the argument for more localized economic models, such as circular economy approaches, which can also contribute to resilience. Now, the second point on improving population mental health. I argue here that it is key for improving quality of life and to reduce care needs, but also again for increasing productivity and as a whole enhancing resilience of the population. So mental health is support is vital, but it's really important to improve living and working conditions to prevent poor mental health, which is key for resilience. So in our report, we show that there's huge costs involved in terms of money, but also in terms of life years lost, and also in terms of quality of life with poor mental health. Now, we have had two crises, two clear crises, which had a mental health impact in the past 2 decades. The first one was the 2008 Great Recession, and the second one, the pandemic. Both of them came with two key lessons. First of all, everybody can suddenly be exposed to risk factors for poor mental health. The Great Recession showed that even individuals in well-paid, secure finance jobs could lose their jobs suddenly and, as a consequence, be at risk at depression, for instance. The pandemic, socially active elderly and young people with very good mental well-being suddenly had to stay at home and could face challenges due to that. So we see actually after these crises, people for whom these risk factors disappeared, they come back to the normal situation rather quickly usually. Now, second, the increase in poor mental health was not without a reason. They were caused by factors such as financial strain and social isolation. So short-term mental health support is vital, but if you get unemployed, maybe it's better to address such underlying factors for a long-term solution. In the terms of the pandemic, making sure people are interconnected better again. So that's really, really two very clear messages from these two crises. Now, there are, of course, these crises exacerbated some problems, but of course, before and after the crisis, there were plenty of people which were socially excluded or unemployed, for instance, so at risk of poor mental health. So these crises just showed that the numbers can quickly increase. So to improve population mental health, it's key for preventing poor mental health, and it can be achieved by improving living and working conditions. So enhancing social inclusion, cohesion, addressing and preventing poverty, things like over-indebtedness and homelessness, stimulating physical health, which also is good for mental health, and then many things, risk factors which women are often more exposed to, such as domestic violence, discrimination at work, for instance, and care burdens at home. Third, and the last point from a report we wrote recently, and that's about digitalization of social protection. A different topic, but again, emphasizing how it can contribute to resilience. By digitalizing social protection sensibly, you can improve responsiveness, system resilience against shocks, so very quickly meeting the needs of a lot of people which suddenly request certain benefit, for instance. and the enforcement of rights of people who are not reached at the moment. So the European Union is a global leader in digital government transformation, and I think Europe can be proud of that. Social protections systems are part of that and are really rapidly digitalizing. So Europe is also at the forefront of its opportunities. So improving effectiveness, efficiency, fairness, access for many groups, including many older people and disabled people, for instance. But there's also many challenges. There's a risk of biases. You can just digitalize bad social protection systems and you cement these dysfunctions in the system. You can dehumanize social protection by removing the face-to-face contacts, so mutual sympathy between administrative workers and people with needs, trust as well. You can reduce access for digitally excluded, and also, even if you do not do that, for people, even if you maintain the face-to-face options, people who do have access to digital digital information, digital access, you create inequalities between those who do have it, all the advantages that come with it, and those who do not have and need to wait much longer for their applications to be approved, etc. Now, building and maintaining trust in institutions is really a desirable outcome of digitalization by making it more effective, etc. But it's also a precondition for its success. It's needed for the usage of and the compliance with and support for digitalization, but also for data sharing, for instance. To strengthen trust, it's key to involve stakeholder engagement, transparency of algorithms. There have been interesting court cases about this across the EU, in Spain, Sweden, for instance, and data usage. Keep human in the loop mechanisms. So there's always some human involvement if the digital processes fail, or that there's always a human option, and good access to appeal mechanisms. Now, even the best protected digital social protection systems can be hit by cyber attacks, and it seems not to be a large issue at the moment, but it may change. They can be hit by system breakdowns and power cuts. So it's really key to have solid backup plans to safeguard user data, also important for the trust, of course, and to ensure continuity of social protection. And lastly, I also want to mention that the total automation of benefits, so removing the need to apply, as you can see already in cases of child benefits, for instance, they're triggered by the birth certificate. People get automatically their child benefit in several countries. The same for paternity, maternity benefits, and family benefits. And also in the case of sickness benefits, that people just go to the doctor puts the digital sickness certificate in the system, and it goes to the employer and to the social protection institutions automatically. So such automation of benefit systems really have a big potential to reach digitally excluded, because it doesn't matter if you're digitally excluded, if you automatically receive the benefit. It matters for other things, but not for receiving your benefit. And also to address non-take-up. At the moment, we see a lot of digitalization geared towards detecting overpayments. Also retroactively, people need to pay back small benefits which they have received in the past, which they were not entitled to. So they, in digitalized systems, they are held responsible for what they put in the system, and people get afraid of that, of course, as well. So there's a lot of resources, digital resources, AI, put towards spotting overpayments, fraud or other types of overpayments. So it's really interesting to see that actually many people do not get the benefits they would be entitled to, but there's very little digitalization is used to overcome that. So there's a lot of emphasis going to overtake up, very little to non-take up. And we argue that it has bad consequences also in terms of the intended purpose of social benefits. So to help people becoming integrated in employment, for instance, that doesn't help if people don't take up the benefit. So benefit automation can also address that. However, there's a problem, which I finally want to note, that in many of these digital systems, they focus on the usual cases, but as soon as somebody is a little bit different, the data is not in the system for some reason, certainly if you're homeless or if you combine employment with self-employment, you don't fit, or your child was born abroad, you don't fit in the usual type of benefit applicants. The information does not apply to you, the digital application does not apply to you, and the automation does not apply to you. And sometimes it can be really difficult to find out how you can then apply. You get stuck in chat robots and so on. So this was a final note. Thank you, and I hope to have contributed a bit to the
Thank you
discussion.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans. Now, this final note on digitalization is going to be of particular interest to our next speaker, who will be joining us now. You will perhaps remember her from the previous workshop that we did together. She's a legal researcher in EU social policy at the European Social Observatory in Brussels, holding a PhD in labor law from the KU Leuven, as well as master's degrees in law from the University of Amsterdam and Tirana. Has worked in a variety of contexts, including academia, non-profits, involved in EU law, with expertise focusing on the future of work and on the digitalization of labor markets. So without further ado, please, here is Dr. Laduri.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for the invitation to be part of this webinar. As you presented, I will continue on the topic of digitalization, but now we'll move into another domain, which is the employment context. The title of my presentation will be Digitalization at a Crossroads between the deregulation pressures and the promise of quality jobs. The outline of my presentation will be the following. First, I will give some context on the rise of artificial intelligence and algorithmic management in the workplace. Then I will explain why this policy area is caught between two competing narratives, which the first one is the simplification or deregulation agenda presented by the Commission. Then I will go ahead with the quality jobs package, and I will finally conclude with some concluding remarks. First, with the rise of AI and algorithmic management in the workplace. Algorithmic management practices actually originate in the platform economy, but now we see that they are increasingly spreading in traditional sectors such as the logistics, transport, healthcare, and finance. And according to the most recent data provided by the Joint Research Center of the Commission, AI is used in most of member states. 1/3 of workers use AI, in particular generative AI, while about algorithmic management, 1/5 of workers in most member states are subject to algorithmic management, in particular the automation of tasks and working time. As Hans also mentioned, AI and algorithmic management bring important opportunities, innovation, productivity, streamlining of work processes, but at the same time, important risks, which are the privacy risk, bias and discrimination, the lack of transparency and accountability, a heightened surveillance, and psychosocial risks. And considering this background, if they are not properly regulated, the growing use of AI at work can harm both workers, but also employers. Just to give you an overview of the current legal framework, you know that there is a directive on platform work adopted in 2024. However, this directive regulates the use of AI in a specific sector, the platform economy. So the questions is raised about the need for similar EU rules across other sectors. At the same time, we have existing EU instruments, notably the AI Act and GDPR, which offer important protections. However, these protections are limited in the employment context. So considering this legal framework, in December 2025, the European Parliament, through its resolution, called for a specific EU directive to regulate the use of AI and algorithmic management in the workplace. Why I say that this is a policy area caught between two competing narratives. In January 2025, the Commission presented its competitiveness compass to restore competitiveness by highlighting the goals of cutting red tape, so to reduce regulatory burden, but at the same time to promote skills and quality jobs. So here we see two narratives that shape competitiveness, simplification on one side and quality jobs on the other. The simplification agenda of the EU has certainly an economic objective, and it intends to lower existing protections. And on the other hand, the quality jobs agenda can be seen as having a more social objectives, and it intends also to introduce new safeguards to respond to contemporary risks. Accordingly, just 2 weeks after the Commission launched the Digital Omnibus, it presented the Quality Jobs Roadmap. To start with the simplification or the deregulation agenda, I consider here just the part of the agenda which might impact workers' rights, as this agenda is very broad and it takes the form mainly of omnibus proposals, but it's also in the form of cutting on gold plating or overcompliance. Here I focus on the digital omnibus, which was proposed by the Commission in November 2025, and the Council and the Parliament already have positions on that, and now is under trilogue negotiations. It proposes changes to several digital legislation, but here I focus mainly on the AI Act and on the GDPR. And I mentioned the examples in the AI Act. It proposes changes to transparency obligations for high-risk systems, or it proposes a postponement of certain high-risk AI obligations. While concerning the GDPR, it intends to modify the definition of personal data to make it more narrow and to allow automated decision-making when certain conditions are met. Other initiatives from the EU in this direction, I can mention here the 28th company law regime, also known as the EU, proposed by the Commission recently in March 2026. This is an initiative intends to create an EU-wide legal framework for European companies, so it's easy for them to have like cross-border operations. However, it comes with some risks. There is mainly the risk for regime shopping. So now European companies can choose which legislation to apply to them, and they can try to avoid the national labor laws which are more favorable for workers, meaning that this may impact and weaken the labor protections. Here I mention also another omnibus which has been proposed by Business Europe in January 2026, the so-called Omnibook, and I focus on the labor market part of this omnibus because it's very broad. It includes more than 130 proposals across 10 policy areas, but on the labor market aspect, some of the changes it proposes to existing EU legislation is to reduce transparency obligations, to weaker working time enforcement, and to have less algorithmic oversight. About the quality jobs package, I will start with the Quality Jobs Roadmap, a communication presented by the Commission in December 2025. In this roadmap, the Commission highlights that innovation and job quality can both go hand in hand, And it recognizes that a key issue that is now shaping labor markets is the growing spread of AI and algorithmic management and its associated risks. Having regard to this, the roadmap also highlights simplification as a guiding principle and the need to enforce existing legislation, to provide more clarity to existing legislation, and to have new measures only when necessary. In this roadmap, the Commission provides for Quality Jobs Act, which is forthcoming and is expected at the end of 2026, with the objective to complement the roadmap and strengthen the overall impact. Now, these days, I think beginning of May, we'll open the second stage consultation with social partners on this act. And within its potential scope includes AI at work, but also health and safety, subcontracting, just transition, enforcement, and social partner involvement. So, as I explained, here we see a policy dilemma, because caught between the deregulation pressures and the promise of quality jobs, now the future of algorithmic management governance remains unclear. So the Commission will face a fundamental choice, so whether to advance targeted rules on AI through a Quality Jobs Act, or to refrain from adding further regulatory burdens in light of the simplification agenda. Even more uncertainty is added to this given the transatlantic pressures, with President Trump threatening for sanction in case the EU goes ahead with an AI regulation. I highlight that regulatory inaction in this policy field will have growing consequences as these technologies continue to spread, because it will threaten not only workers' protection, but also job quality, skills demand, and ultimately will weaken EU competitiveness. But at the same time, it will risk to polarize the labor market in terms of protection schemes, and platform workers will be the only ones protected for the use of AI and not the other traditional workers. Under the simplification agenda, it's possible that one scenario that we have within the Quality Jobs Act is that we have a simplified legal instrument on AI at work, meaning that it will provide just some answers to some main gaps, but it won't go further to overburden. We don't know the shape that this instrument will take, whether it will be a directive or not. However, this instrument already has some potential blueprints. We have the platform work directive there, which already includes very strong protections, such as transparency and accountability obligations, the human in the loop principle, limits on processing personal data, collective labor rights, and it has strong enforcement mechanism, and this can serve as a blueprint for governing AI at work more broadly. But at the same time, there is a forthcoming ILO standard on platform work, which will be discussed in Geneva in June 2026. And this also can be considered for a new initiative. And I will conclude with some quotations taken from the Competitiveness Compass, but also from a speech of President von der Leyen during the European Employment and Social Forum, that the foundation of Europe's competitiveness is its people, and only by securing good working conditions, quality jobs, European standards can become a competitive advantage. And I conclude with the part from the speech from President von der Leyen, that competitive Europe must remain social Europe. And here I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Hilda. Now, for our last contributions before we segue into the discussion and the conversations following, is from one of the representatives of the Center for European Policy Studies, a senior research fellow, where she was also the head of the Economic Policy Unit and the Jobs and Skill Unit, as well as the Director of Research from 2020 to 2023. She's a macroeconomist by training and has provided evidence-based policy analysis to EU institutions and national governments over the last 15 years by completing research projects on economic policy analysis, policy and evaluations related to both economic and labor markets, economic policy, labor markets, and financial services. Please welcome Dr. Cynthia Alcini.
Good morning, everyone, and many thanks for having me here. So I want to share, I do not have a presentation, I just want to share some thoughts with you, which I think complement quite well, at least I hope so, the presentation of Hans and of Hilda. I think it's, while I was listening, I realized that how these transformations that we wanted to discuss today have shaped even the content of the presentation. You know, when we speak about social policy, traditionally we think of education, skills, employment, social inclusion. And in fact, today the presentations were on energy and energy transition, on mental health, digitalization, how the work environment is changing because of AI. I think these are already strong signals of how our world is evolving, and how, speaking of social policy, actually demand an adaptation to these challenges. And I want to continue along these lines, really focusing at the European level. Hilda already did it, basically focusing on the regulatory framework. I want to speak a bit about resources. My thinking is probably very much influenced by the Brussels debate today around the next MFF, the next multi-annual financial framework, and the EU budget. I think the EU budget is a mirror or a reflection, if you want, of the EU priorities. And we are observing a multiplicity or a growing number of EU priorities. I mean, this was already mentioned. Security and defense is something new for Europe. This is a big novelty and is demanding a lot of political attentions, but also new resources, which will have to be taken from somewhere in an environment where actually we have constrained a budget. At the same time, that there is a much greater emphasis on competitiveness. The geopolitical order has changed, and the context in which we operated is now redefined by big players, America and China, where governments are heavily intervening in the economy, and there is a sense that this is also needed in Europe through industrial policy. Again, an approach which demands additional resources. So there is really one very fundamental question about the next budget or the next programming period, about how to allocate and according to which priorities allocate resources. And one big question is, where do we put social objectives? Social objectives have been traditionally part of the EU approach. I mean, it's important to recognize that most of social policies remain a national competence. So I think this is really an important qualification. And member states do the big job when it comes to social policy, also to reflect the diversity of political preferences and social structures at a very different level, both from the labor market, but also the social dialogue. However, the EU has always provided a compass when it comes to the functioning of the labor market, and traditionally quite substantial resources have been allocated to the so broad objective of social cohesion, which remains important for the European project. Now, the question is how this is going to change in the future, or likely to change in the future after 2028. Now, last year, about a year ago, the Commission came out with a proposal about the next EU budget for the next programming period, so next 7 years, 2028-2034. Should be noted that this is under negotiation, so there are intense, to say the least, negotiations to redefine priorities. But basically, if we look at what we have today in the Commission proposals, we have somehow a tension. I would say this is my reading, but it's of course open for discussion. On the one hand, the European Pillar of Social Rights is presented as the compass, the key defining element of the EU approach to social policies. So in this sense, that there is no going back or retreat on when it comes to social priorities. Also, in terms of a broad envelope that headline figures that is allocated to social policies is quite close to what we have in the current MFF, roughly speaking about 100 billion. However, there are some important qualifications, and I want to focus on two aspects. So the first one is that while this overall envelope has more or less the same amount, what is granted is actually lower than what we have today. So it is envisaged the possibility that member states can take some loans when it comes to basically achieving social objectives. And the second big difference is that basically why the European Social Fund, the ESF plus, actually remains something which is defined from a legal perspective, de facto it is absorbed by the so-called national plans, national and regional plans. And this may risk actually diluting some of the social objectives. To the extent that basically, while the EU imposes a threshold in terms of allocation of resources, this 14% threshold, member states will have high discretion on how to spend the money. So on the one hand, this may have an advantage because it could fit better the national needs, because governments are supposed to know better national needs and to coordinate across regions. On the other side, there is the risks that some of the specific objectives, like social inclusion, like support to the most vulnerable groups, like the need or other groups, may be relegated to a lower importance. And in this situation where basically the funds are all put together and objectives are actually mixed together, in case of all the shocks, money can be easily relocated towards other priorities. So the bottom line is that there is quite a bit of uncertainty because it will depend very much on the national member states, and there is an objective risk of dilution of the social objectives. The second aspect I want to highlight relates to research in social policies, which is also an aspect that is part of the EU budget. I imagine that many people in this room know Horizon. This meeting is possible because of the financial support that we have received from the Horizon program. And while in the next budget, Horizon will remain a standalone program, in the formulation, basically it has been incorporated under the European Competitiveness Fund. And basically, this serves, if you want, to build a narrative whereby research will have to be more prone to serve competitiveness and therefore more applied to technology, industrial development, and scale up of companies. So I'm not saying that this means that all Horizon funds will be devoted to it, but it is clear that putting it under an umbrella which is called competitiveness gives a certain sense of direction, which may reduce the scope for research in social sciences and humanities. So this concern has been taken up, for instance, by the European Parliament. So the ITRE committee published just 10 days ago I think, 185 amendments to the proposal of the Commission in relation to Horizon. And I think that there is a strong push to keep Horizon as the program for research, which is not only serving competitiveness. So the bottom line message I wanted to give is that moving into a world which is defined by deep transformations, whether this is technology or the need to move towards a greener economy, face geopolitical challenges, put us in a situation where priorities may be defined by incoming shocks. We are seeing now what is happening now with the war in Iran, and where the risk for, the need for a social response may be perceived as higher than ever. Resources for this may become shorter than ever. I will leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cinzia. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your contribution. It is now time to shift towards what I hope will be a rather more extensive panel discussion than a 7-minute one. So I hope that for those of you who have joined, you will stay with us a little longer, because there's quite a bit of material to discuss, and I think rich soil for conversation based on all of your presentations. We've heard quite a bit about the shift in incentives, in urgencies and priorities over the past years, and how we perceive the policy dilemma at the European level. Do you, in that context, think that the way in which policymakers listen to researchers, to those making some recommendations, has shifted? And if yes, in what way? Question to the room.
If I can give a try, maybe, if I can. I think this is actually a quite fair question, but also quite difficult. And I think that besides the transformations we have been discussing about, that there is another one which I think can affect significantly policy making, is that at least that is my reading. The U.S. administration, and I'm starting from quite far, but this U.S. administration has triggered a very significant change in policy making, and basically it has marked the return of transactional politics, where basically rules are ignored very often, and basically policies can be shaped by politics and by spheres of influence in the policy decision making. And my greatest concern is that, and this is typically very costly. This introduced transaction cost and actually quite a lot of waste of money from a purely economic conceptual way, because this may incentivize pressure and even exchanges in order to get certain policies in place. And therefore, in practice, this means more advocacy and lobby actions. Let's put it this way. Now, my concern is that actually such kind of model may also be imported somehow in the EU. And for instance, the reintroduction of industrial policy may favor this. I expect to see more time and more resources spent to lobby or to advocate for certain policy changes, or to go in certain direction, for instance, here in Brussels, but also at national level. We are in a context where basically the need to respond to crisis or changing needs requires more discretion, which has a lot of advantages, but also make it much more exposed actually to pressure of interest groups, which can be of coming from different aspects, to go in a certain direction. And in this sense, if you speak about research or independent research, I work in a think tank where for us independent research is critical, and I think the colleagues in this room would agree on this. May not be very appealing, in fact, because many debates will be much more politicized. So this is I'm putting a bit negative view on the future evolutions. This is not necessarily the way it will go, but I think it's worthwhile to reflect about what this could imply.
Right. Thank you so much. Ilda, you've mentioned, well, your presentation and the shift towards digitalization has also quite a bit to do with this notion of competitiveness, of attempting to remain in the game compared to such actors as the United States and China. Do you think that nowadays competitiveness and social policy are being treated as more of a zero-sum game as before, as a trade-off, or are there still people who say this can be a win-win, or that social policy is, in fact, perhaps even the way towards greater competitivity and greater advantage for the EU still?
Okay, thank you, Andreas. I think that the EU premises are based on a balance between both economic considerations of competitiveness, but also social considerations. Recently, the EU has highlighted more the competitiveness side and has sidelined more social policy developments, where we see mainly soft law instruments, like as the anti-poverty strategy. But at the same time, there is a promise of the Quality Jobs Act, which is a forthcoming legislative package. And I would say that this is the main initiative of the EU in the field of social policy making. I think that notwithstanding that competitiveness is like nowadays like the buzzword, the mantra, still there are considerations on social policy at the EU level, and the Quality Jobs Act is like is testifying as this.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Hans, you mentioned the low-hanging fruits, essentially, of policymaking with the triple wins and numerous scientifically proven, essentially, ways in which social policy decisions can be taken in order to support the European Union. Do you find that policymakers listen and understand to these arguments? And what is the challenge then, perhaps, in order to translate what is scientifically obvious from your conclusions into something that policymakers will listen to nowadays and transform into political action?
Yes, so I think we get some help from the US in that regard, because, for instance, okay, to be specific to the 3 points I made, the three big points, and the one on energy, well, the US is against greening policies. In the US, you can, okay, that's may not understand, but at least that's, well, if that reflects the opinion of the population, well, but interestingly, the US also is against greening policies in the EU. And I think there's nothing more obvious than that greening policies in the EU are bad for the US, because less money will be earned from energy purchased from the US. There's no bigger help which you can get than the US being against these greening policies, because it means that probably it's good for Europe to continue on this greening path. Maybe not for people who are not engaged with the greening argument. the US gives another argument, and that means energy independence, resources flowing to other countries instead of staying in the EU. So there's a big economic argument to continue with reducing the energy dependence of the EU. So there, I think the EU or the US kind of gives an extra argument to go for that. Then in terms of digitalization in social protection, well, I think there's a big challenge. We depend a lot on non-EU companies in the area of digitalization. Yeah, we present in our report some examples of how the digitalization of social protection was developed in-house in some Swedish municipalities, for instance. But still, we depend a lot on non-EU companies. So there's and that can come with risk. Of course, we can learn from that, and of course, we should apply the tools when they benefit. But it's really important to develop better EU. To make sure EU alternatives are developed. And you can think of various ways how to stimulate that. But and in terms of the third point on mental health, well, I think there's a big problem when you speak with policymakers, and that's usually policymakers think about one problem. They think about housing as a problem. They think about healthcare as a problem. They think about the financial side as a problem, but we really need this realization that you don't need to, for instance, if you want to do something about poor mental health, then you don't need to limit yourself to care services, to improve care services. No, you should address housing issues, etc. So all these cross policy impacts are not enough taken into account, and the EU is in a good place to stimulate countries to do that because it has a longer term objectives usually, and it has a broader perspective. But even within the EU with different DGs, you see that there could be a little bit more to prevent a narrow area perspective.
All right, thank you so much, Hans. Now, perhaps a broader question to all of you now. We've talked about the transatlantic pressures from the EU. We've talked about the economic realities of, for example, competition and changing policies with China, with the US. We've talked also about pressures and influences from lobbying groups, what with the discussion of the omnibus proposal being suggested by, if memory serves, the Business Europe lobby group. But one pressure, or at least one influence we haven't talked about, is that of civil society and that of the broader population. Now, recently on May the 1st, the EU-Mercosur agreement, after over 25 years of negotiations, was finally pushed through, at least partially implemented, with still a significant amount of backlash from civil society organizations and pressure groups commenting about it to some extent. Do we see a remaining relevance of civil society and public opinion in EU decision-making, or has that influence shifted as well in the past few years? All right, I think Hans raised his hand first, so I think we'll go there and then to Cynthia, that's all right.
But maybe Cynthia can go first because my comment will be a bit more specific.
All right then.
Okay, maybe just some thoughts because it's something I followed a bit. So I think in the context of the Mercosur, the opposition, I don't think was coming from civil society at large, but it was very much coming from farmers from a few member states, notably France and Poland, but also Italy. So. And I have to say that when the farmers comes to Brussels, all the city is shaking because that they can be quite loud and can make people afraid. So I'm joking on this, but it's so farmers are a group which is very much heard in Brussels. I mean, after the last protest, the Commission President basically proposed to give 45 billion out of the EU budget to farmers to basically compensate them from the Mercosur agreement potential impacts, which, by the way, are likely to be very negative on farmers because what is often not very known in the policy debate is that actually the agreement has a lot of protective measures for EU farmers. So here my point is that we are in a situation where it's critically important to hear civil society, to give voice to civil society, because it's a way to ensure that democracy works well. But we also need to acknowledge that we are in a reality where, especially through social media, information can be instrumentalized and can be somehow managed towards certain objectives. So I think that a key role of researchers and a think tank, which this is something which is very close to my heart, is actually to try to provide more neutral information and to bring clarity in debates which tend to be highly politicized and very often position are not necessarily reflecting the reality. Thank you.
All right then, Ilda, some further thoughts on the matter as well, or shall we go to Hans first?
If Hans wants to go ahead, please. He was first.
No problem, you can.
Okay, I'll be short. I think that civil society voice is still alive, but how much it is heard, I am not sure. For example, I'll provide the example of the Quality Jobs Act. The social partners will be consulted in that regard. Consultation will start soon, the second stage. Also, ETUC is a strong proponent against the simplification agenda, even though this hasn't much influence in the approval of the omnibus. For example, the sustainability omnibus was approved. But also researchers, the research community is quite active. I will share my own experience that with regard to the initiative on AI at work, researchers were consulted by DG Employment of the Commission to provide their evidence on both qualitative and quantitative one with regard to this instrument. And the same has happened before with the adoption of the Platform Work Directive.
All right, thank you for that. And now Hans, of course.
Yes, but that was good order, I think, because you just gave an answer more directly to your question in terms of whether the impact is still there and if it's increasing or decreasing. But I just wanted to say that I don't know that, but that I do know that it's incredibly important to make sure there's a strong civil society, and the reason, like a very specific reason why I'm saying that is in the social protection, well, the digitalization of social protection report, we found that of all the biases and problems with algorithms, etc., with automatic decision making on whether an applicant gets a benefit or not, all the problems or with data infringements or problems with data protection and so on, most of them were identified by civil society organizations. And it can be a bit annoying if you're public administration and you get a civil society saying that there's that there's something wrong. But in the long run, it's better because you can see that clearly from the Netherlands, for instance, where there were some big scandals which were also revealed by civil society organizations. And now the Netherlands has taken actions to address these problems where other countries can learn from. We we describe them in the box in our report on digitalization of social protection. But so in the long run, to make sure people trust the system, you need civil society taking public administration to court, etc. Because otherwise such biases will not always be spotted, such problems in the system. So it's one of the checks and balances. Of course, there are more, including researchers as well. So all this needs in the legal system and so on. All this needs to be very strong for the for effective digitalization of social protection, but the same applies for other policy areas probably.
Thank you so much, Hans. Now, we've talked quite a bit about the EU level, but as you've pointed out, and as has been also mentioned before, social policies have often been the purview, or at least the privileged purview, of the nation state and of national politics. And as you've described, also the relationship between civil society and between voices influencing policy making is different at the national level. So how do you think the way in which voices, and for example, the voices of scientists, but the voices of civil society as well, how do you think the difference between the way they are heard at the regional, the national, and the EU level is going to perhaps shape the future of social policy in the upcoming years? Any of you have a perspective on the matter?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I will need to leave shortly, so I just want to check, like, how long more or less you think?
Oh, I think we'll wrap up relatively soon, but I wanted us to have a little bit of a conversation still.
Okay.
If this is a question that isn't as inspiring, perhaps then simply looking to the future, let's say to the next 5 years, what do you believe is the one area of social policy that you think will be determining whether Europe succeeds or fails in this transition? And do you think that Europe is listening to the right voices for this? All right. Hans, please.
Yes, I think it's key for Europe to not go with the flow and let itself how do you say, like, drive crazy by US, Chinese, etc. voices. Just keep cool and think independently, and that's a challenge, and not just so stay. And I think the EU is kind of doing that in foreign policy at least, but maybe also in terms of other policies and priorities, it is really important for the EU to be strong in terms of thinking independently and long term.
Right. Thank you, Hans. Cynthia, Ilda, any thoughts on the matter, and also on where the center of gravity of policymaking on social issues lies at the EU and perhaps also at the national and regional level?
Maybe just to briefly reinforce and complement what Anne said, I think that we are in a situation where we have a multiplicity of shocks which require response. This basically could lead always to quick fix and privilege the short term over the long term. And I think in general this may be in the end backfiring. And I think it's crucially important to keep a time horizon which is sufficiently long. And here I see two aspects. One relates to the energy transition. I think this was already mentioned by Hans earlier, but basically we are now in a situation where energy prices are increasing and there is quite some pressure also in terms of social response actually to reduce the impact of such high energy prices. But de facto, this means subsidizing consumption of fossil fuels. This is basically the reality. So on the one hand, there is this idea of relieving households and individuals, but also some firms from high cost. On the other side, this is basically reducing the cost of fossil fuels and therefore reducing the incentive actually to move towards alternative sources of energies. And I think this is there is really the trade-off between the short term and the long term, because I think in order to reduce or to mitigate the impacts of future energy shock, the only solution that we have is actually to accelerate the green transition. But this requires long-term plans and investment rather than a subsidy or short-term response, which is and politically this is quite difficult. So there is this dimension of social policy that interacts with the green transition that are very much interlinked, and there we may have a trade-off short-term, long-term. The second aspect I think is technological transformation. So this is I think it was already mentioned by Hilda. There are a lot of changes that are happening in the short term, and it's quite difficult actually to get a good sense of what this implies for workers at the workplace, but also for employment in the longer term. So I think this I would put my emphasis on this. There are many different issues, but I would really say that these two areas are strategically important, both at the EU level but also at national level.
You are muted, Andreas.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Hilda, if you have any perspectives on the matter.
Yes, I would again insist on the regulation of digitalization. The EU should do that in order to be a sustainable actor. And this doesn't mean that the EU will go against technology, but it will be essential to ensure democracy at work, to have some labor standards. And this becomes also essential in light of now we have some national regulatory responses in the field of digitalization, and this creates a fragmented regulatory landscape. So it's essential to have a supranational response in this domain. Also, a second area is the skills agenda. I believe that the EU should advance on this agenda, given in particular the skills shortages in the digital age.
All right. Thank you so very much to all three of you, to all three panelists for their participation. And thank you for staying a little bit longer than we thought, but I dare say it was worth it. Of course, this is a topic that is far from done being discussed. And I do believe that all four of us would have had quite a few things to say about the policymaking at the EU level, but also about how national actors and civil society actors and other levels of governance can influence and can shape policy, and how they continue to do so. If anything, the events of the last decades have shown that events taking place at a national level can impact EU policy and global policy indeed, and the vice versa in ways that we did not suspect or did not see as prominently before, and that the global relationships in terms of geopolitics and economics continue to change the game for everyone. I hope that this was also interesting to our audience. This webinar, this conversation is being recorded and is going to be available on the TransEuroWorks website, as well as on the TransEuroWorks YouTube channel. We hope to have inspired you to take a look at the project and to have a few further thoughts on EU policymaking, national policymaking, and on the future of social policy. From me, it's thank you and goodbye. Have a great afternoon, and thank you to my panelists.
Thank you
very much. Have a good
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Good day.